twice, and I get to meet two new authors to us, Elizabeth Donne and Sophia Nye. Ladies, thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thanks, Evelyn.
Hi, thanks for having us.
So Elizabeth and Sophia are both Right Track finalists, and they are in the Tales of Timeless Romance collection, which goes live on Wednesday this week and has just bunches of stories from medieval times to Regency era. Lots and lots of stories for you to fall in love with, and new authors for you to meet. So I'm really glad to have a chance to talk to the two of you today. So I thought maybe we'd start out, since there are a bunch of different flavors of stories in the collection, if you could just start and tell me a little bit about your story. And why don't we start with Elizabeth, since you're in the middle.
So my story is based on the true romance of Elizabeth Barrett and Robert Browning, both very famous poets. Robert Browning is best known, I think, for My Last Duchess, and Elizabeth Barrett was known for How Do I Love Thee, which is what I've based my story's title on. And so their true story is actually a writer's dream. It's got everything. It's got tragedy and subterfuge and heartbreak and sneaking around. and ultimately, unfortunately, the way they got their happy ending was to elope. And of course, that's not really a happy ending for romance authors. So I did cheat with my ending, but it's actually I hardly had to do much. They so inspired me, and part of the process was reading her biography. And wow, was she an interesting character? So it was just an easy story to write. But it's based on the love affair and the tragedy they had to overcome, because Elizabeth's, well, she's not Elizabeth, she's Sophia in the story. So Sophia, sorry, Sophia.
No, my real name is
great
Elizabeth.
It's a good name. It is
a good name.
So funny.
In the story, Sophia's lost her mother, and it's broken the father's heart, and he has forbidden any of his children from marrying because he wants them to stay with him, because he sees his wife in his children and doesn't want to lose that bit of them. And that's actually true. That actually happened. So yeah, what more did I have to do than to write about that? And then Tobias is the hero, and he first falls in love with her writing because she's a poet, and he writes her this letter of admiration. And it all begins with this letter that he sends her, in which he talks about how much he loves her writing, and for the first time she realizes that she's more than just her father's daughter, and then he has to try and convince her to meet. So that the meet cute is more complicated in the story because she's not allowed to have visitors.
Well, it sounds great. Let me let Sarah in. Sarah just joined us, so let me let Sarah in, and then I have questions about the book. So,
thank you.
Hi, Sarah. We're recording, and Elizabeth was just telling us about her story. So, what I wanted to ask is the research that went into writing it. How did you stop yourself from just spiraling out and out?
Oh, well, especially because it's a novella and not a novel. So I had to really sort of be strict with myself. So what I ended up doing was actually, as I was reading her biography, making notes of things that were really different and unusual, and so that it would make her a more interesting character. So I stuck to that. I stuck to the character development rather than the plot pieces, because I knew I'd have to twist the plot around to change the ending. So I stuck to the characters, and I made little notes of little nuances that they had that made them different to perhaps a typical hero or heroine.
Oh, lovely. Well, it sounds like so much fun. And I love that it's based on a true love story.
Well, I was so in love with my characters. I was like rooting for them the whole way. And as I was writing certain scenes, I was like crying while I was typing. Like, come on, you guys.
Full Joan Wilder moments are our favorites. Awesome. So, Sophia, what about you? What's your story about?
My story is a retelling of the Tale of Robin Hood, basically. So I actually decided to do it because Robin Hood was one of my first historical, romances that I watched as a kid, and it's always been one of my favorites because of that. Obviously the Kevin Costner version.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I feel like that goes without saying, but I just
that is not a hard sell.
Yeah, exactly. So I decided to do Robin Hood, and the first thing I did was I read the original medieval plays, and then I didn't realize this until I read them, but Marion isn't a character in them. So
oh,
what?
That made my plotting a little more interesting. So I took kind of it's just a lot of like mini episodes of Robin like stealing from people basically, and battling the sheriff and things. So I took all of that, and so Robin's character is really, really strongly correlated to the actual medieval character from the ballads and plays, and then Marion I completely invented. So
sounds like you're not the first one to have completely invented her.
No, they started inventing her, a contemporary of Shakespeare, which is where I think a lot of the modern versions get their Marion from. That was where she was added, and she replaced the Virgin Mary, like the religious icon, because there was this whole thing going on with the Protestant Reformation and all that, and they did not want anything to do with Mary in the play, so they replaced her with Maid Marian as his romantic interest. So in my story, Robin is an outlaw. He's just learned at the beginning that his sister has married the sheriff of Nottingham, and that he's very upset about that. So he moves to Sherwood to keep an eye on her. And so he's over there redistributing wealth as he does. And Marion is sent to live with the sheriff also because his wife, who we know is Robin's sister, she has no idea, is like a paragon of courtly culture, and Marion can't snag a husband. So her parents send her there to study under Lady Dev, who's Robin's sister. And that is actually her real name. I used real characters from history. I could talk about that for ages. I won't. But anyway, her. So Marion so Robin sends two of his men, John being one that I know everybody's familiar with John, and Friar Tuck, to kind of keep an eye inside the keep on his sister. And then they end up stealing silver from the sheriff and running away, as one does when you're an outlaw. And Marion sees them and follows them because that's the kind of person she is. She wants to be able to report back to her posts where they're going with this silver. And that leads to Marion spending some time out in the forest with the outlaws. So it's a really fun adventure through the forest and back in the keep. And it's just so much fun. I'm really excited.
Like fun. Yeah, it sounds like fun. And I'm going to ask you the same question because I can see how this would be very problematic. How do you stop yourself from going down the rabbit hole and staying down there?
I always read at least one book that's the historical basis, and then I plot after that, and I only go back to do more research if it's required of the plot. And I have a very specific.
That is so disciplined of you.
It took time to be able to do that. My first few books were just spirals of research. So, but for this one, I was able to, I needed to learn how medieval lockpicking worked, which is fun, but I had to stop so I read like 2 articles on it, and then I had to stop, and that was enough to get it written. So, yeah.
I think that's a thing that you learn as a writer is that there are lots of things that you need to know that the readers don't need to know, but you need to know it so that everything else lines up and makes sense when they go to read it, and they can go on the journey with you. So.
Yeah, I think it adds to the immersion as well. The more authentic.
I'm going to give you my willing suspension of disbelief, and I want you to take me somewhere,
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like so much fun, and I hate the idea that she wasn't there to begin with, but I love the idea that she actually did end up in the story, because I think it's a much better story with with
It definitely, it's much more, it's a very different, but I think much more interesting story with her in it. So
that makes perfect sense. So Sarah, what about you? What's your story about?
Oh, okay. Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm glad you made it.
I'm on my phone. Mine is a Robin Hood story too.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's set in the Edwardian age, and Robin Hood and Maid Marian are on a steamship going from England to the United States. And I set it in 1910 because I wanted it to be before the Titanic. Because the Titanic, that would be all they would be talking about, and that wouldn't be part of my story. So my heroine is a adventurous spirit. She's the middle child of 3 girls, and her father is the new ambassador from Great Britain to the United States.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she managed to talk her cousin Freddie, who was her father's secretary, into letting her join a men's only card room where they were playing cards. So she has a bit of naughtiness to her, which I liked. And during the play, she wins a big pile of money, and much to the chagrin of the villain, who is named Lord Archibald Blanding. And she's known Archie since childhood, but Archie is really irritated that she's excessively celebrating her win, and he accuses her of cheating. And she's smart enough to know not to engage Archie in an argument, because Archie is the most important person in the room. He's the high-ranking.
Sarah, hold on just a second. I want to try something with your microphone and see if I can get it. I'm having I'm just getting a little fuzz. I'm not sure why.
Okay.
Let me see. Okay, now say something.
Okay, I'm saying something.
It's a little better. It's a little better.
It could be my voice. I have my fan on. I'll turn that off.
No, actually, it's fine.
All right. So, anyway, there's one person in the room that nobody knows, and it's an American, and his name is Robert Huntsman. And Robert, no one stands up for her except him, and he says, Lord Blanding, I believe you owe the lady an apology. And Archie is just flabbergasted because he's, of course, a lord, and but he does give her an apology. He says, well, maybe I'm really, didn't mean anything by it and all that. And so she gives this American a second look. And it's kind of, the story is more about, not that chivalry is dead, but that, the gallantry is still alive. So the theft is Lord Blanding's mother's diamond necklace, and the story is often running after she gives him the second look, and she's ready to get to know him better.
Well, it sounds like a lot of fun, and I love the idea that it's set on a steamship.
It's meant to be fun. I guess that's the way to describe it.
Yeah. Well, these are just 3 of the stories that are in the collection. There are, I think, 6 or 8. There are a lot. There's a bunch of them. So, yeah, there are lots of good stories in the collection to read. I thought we could take a little bit of time, since we have a few more minutes, and talk maybe a little bit about the books that you first fell in love with when you fell in love with romance. If that would be okay. And I know Elizabeth is primed and ready because she went and got her.
What'd you get?
Well, I must say, my mum has always taught me to love literature, so I owe that to her. So as a young child, she exposed me at the age of 8. I was reading the classics and Shakespeare and all those things, and really fell in love with them. I was too young to know that it was supposed to be hard, if you know what I mean. So I just assumed that was what people read. So I was reading Jane Austen and George Eliot and Emily Bronte and all of those at a young age, and that turn of phrase really appealed to me. The way, I mean, even now, the British people have a way of insulting you that is so creative, you know.
Yes.
So that really appealed to me, that the turn of phrase of historical language. So historical language in general appealed to me. And then I loved the way that Jane Austen wrote romance, because it wasn't, it was all about delicate things, like subtleties. That really appealed to me. The fact that it wasn't all like in your face. It was the brushing of a skirt and the intensity of a moment between two characters just by the proximity in the room.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
we all know the wet t-shirt scene. You know, when Darcy came out of the water in the pond and things like that. So, but none of it was. It was very evocative. And I fell in love with that kind of romance. That's why I write sweet romance, even though there's lots of good things to be said for the spicy ones. I love that simmering under the skin kind of, where there's that almost like that romantic angst. That has appealed to me from my very first experience of romance.
That makes perfect sense.
So yeah, and so the books that I've recently read that I've loved have been the very well-known Mr. Malcolm's List, which became a movie, and then the less well-known but brilliantly written A Marion by Jenny Handley. A bit of advertising in here. I don't know these people, but they're wonderful authors, and I love Sarah E. Ladd as well. So they who I read, because like I said, that they all write that kind of romance where you titivate but don't necessarily touch.
Yeah. There's something. There was a story that was written ages ago, and I'm going to embarrass myself by not being able to remember the author, but it was a Hasidic story, and like that talk of covering your hair and then uncovering it. That moment of this is just for him. You know, like this is just I think that there's something so compelling about that idea. And because I get to say this every week too, the nifty thing about Dragonblade is that you can read across heat levels. So we have flame books, which are way open door. Sandra Suko has a new.
I just did wipers for your glasses because it's all listed up.
I just did a Publishers Marketplace announcement for Sandra Suko's new series, and there's some light bondage in that one, which is, and then we have Sweet Dreams, which is closed door, and is much more of that. You like closed door too. Kate Archer has a Sweet Dreams book coming out this week too. So. And then we've got originals, which are in the middle. So something for everybody. Sophia, what about you? How did you start? Where's your first taste of romance reading?
So I didn't realize it at the time, but my first taste of just romance at all was fantasy romance. I like it when I was a young adult. I read like Elizabeth Hayden and Jacqueline Carey and things like that. If you don't know them, you should absolutely look them up. They're fantastic. But then and Juliet Marillier, I think it's Marillier or Marillier. I actually have never heard it said out loud, but she writes young adult romance, and those are great. But the first sort of like paperback romance that I read that made me think, oh, hey, like maybe it would be fun to write these was The Secret by Julie Garwood. And it is still to this day, I think, my favorite Highland romance. It's just so, it's like, I heard someone once describe it as a Hershey kiss because it's so sweet and it just makes you melt and you just want another one. And
oh, that's lovely.
I love that. I can't come up with another way to describe it now because it's perfect. So I binge read like every historical she wrote. And then, you know, I also really enjoy Sarah McLean's Regencies are fantastic. And I think were the first ones I read of historical romance. And between those two authors, that's definitely what got me interested in writing it. So
fun.
And I love the steamy. My books are way open door. You're welcome in.
about you, Sarah? I know you said that you like sweet stories. What was your first taste of romance reading? I have to be careful about how you phrase that. The first taste of romance is not the same thing. So
I have to confess, I come from a household where we weren't allowed to read romance.
oh my.
Yeah, and my mother was just so against it that it had to be a covert operation. But I did like Thomas Hardy, and I liked Far from the Maddening Crowd, and I liked the Bronte sisters. There was something about that there's one man just for you.
Sarah, lean forward just a little bit for a second for me. Can you lean forward?
Yep.
Oh shoot! There was one moment where you were talking and the fuzzing was completely gone. I'm not sure what happened.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, it's never mind. Just so Thomas Hardy and Far from the Madding Crowd.
Yeah, that was a very feeling story where she's a little bit out of the box. I mean, she wasn't a standard heroine, you know. And just the fact that there's just one man for you is, you know, it's a fantasy that you have in childhood. And so I like the Bronte sisters, but I liked LaGirl Spencer. I think something about her books, her opening chapters were so vivid and so got you right into the scene in the historical scene. But I liked the westerns a lot, you know. And they have romances in those westerns. It's funny, they men don't think they have in space and all that, but they're romances, they're connections, there's relationships, and it just adds so much to a story.
Yeah, it does.
To have relationships and to have people care about each other and want others to succeed. So anyway, yeah, it's funny. Times have changed, and I'm glad of it. Because my girls will read romances.
Well, especially if their mom writes it.
Oh yes, and you know that became problematic. But now that you know I've had some success, my mother doesn't seem to have a problem. So I'm glad for that as an education for all of us. But I like romance because I like the happy ending. I think that's really important, especially during like COVID, for example, to have a book and to be happy at the end. That two people found each other and are happy together.
Yeah, I think it's the one thing we all want too.
That's what we all want, and that's why I'm looking forward to reading the other stories in our anthology, because it's just so much. It just leaves you feeling so good when you're done reading.
Yeah, and this is an easy choice because you can read and enjoy the whole thing without having to choose, because there's so many wonderful stories in the collection.
Yeah, and really good authors. I'm so happy to be picked with the other ladies.
Awesome. Well, I know, Elizabeth, you had said that you were not previously published. Is that right?
No.
So, can we talk a little bit about how you decided to write and how you came to the story? And Sarah, I'm going to mute you for just a second, just so that I think the fuzz can. There we go. So the fuzz goes away a little bit. I'm hoping that that's just on my end and not the whole way. But Elizabeth, can you talk a little bit about what made you decide to start writing?
Oh, it's one of those situations where I just always wrote. I mean, I was, from the time that I went to school, I loved reading, and it led to writing spontaneously. So I've written my whole life, mostly just for the pleasure of it. And because I have kids, but they're all growing up now, so I can finally start putting the extra effort in for marketing and trying to get published and those kinds of things. But I've been writing my whole life. I've written 6 novels prior to this that I didn't attempt to get published necessarily, just because I wanted to be able to have an outlet for my urge to write.
Yeah.
I think when you're a writer, it's something that you need to do. You don't decide one day, I think, gosh, I know what, today I think I'll write a novel. I think it's something that almost like a craving inside of you to let that creative spirit out. So that's always been a part of my life. It's just become a more focused part of my life the last 2-3 years.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Well, that makes sense. That idea that you have to that you have stories that you have to tell, whether you're telling them to somebody else or not, that there's still stories that you need to tell. So that's makes sense. Sophia, I know you are previously published. How did you discover that you are a writer and come to that kind of?
I honestly think I can't say it better than Elizabeth. There's just, which is so funny because my actual name is Elizabeth. So hearing you call her to talk, and I'm sitting here like, nope.
Her character Sophia, and it's just
using all my willpower here. But I just, it's like she said, I've always felt that I express myself best in stories, and it helps you process the world around you and share some of the things that bring you a lot of joy, or that, move you in a specific way, to share that with other people through writing. And I think that's, like she said, it's not a choice. It's like, I have to write now, not want to write. It's, you have to write. You can't not write. So
yeah, that makes sense. Sarah, what about you?
So I think I always wrote, even as a kid, we would do plays. And funnily enough, they always had a romance, because my grandmother had a whole attic full of prom dresses and military uniforms. So they were always in the play. But I think for me, I have a message that I want to get across to other women. And it's part feminism, but it's also part, you can do this. And I just want to encourage other women to strike out on their own and have their own voice. And that's what I like to do with my heroines. I like them to be a little bit extraordinary.
Yeah. Oh, that makes perfect sense. There's something so empowering about romance that I think gets skipped over all the time, because it is really about a woman owning her story, in whatever way that goes. Ladies, it was a delight talking to you today. I really appreciate it. I'm so glad I had a chance to meet you. I had all these names in my head and no faces to go with it. And now I've got both. So this was wonderful. We're going to, this will air in the Dragonblade readers group. So if you're watching this, you need to hang around, because the authors will be doing a takeover in the readers group that day. So you need to make sure that you scroll up and down through the post so that you get a chance to see everybody's snippets and learn more about the authors that are part of the collection. You want to grab the collection right away, because Dragonblade books are their very, very best deal on pre-order and release. And if you by chance miss it with it, which there's no reason you should, but if you do, you can still read in Kindle Unlimited. But ladies, it was great to talk to you. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for having us. This was so much fun. It's nice to see everybody's face, like you said.
Yes.
Glad we could do it.
Bye.
Thanks.